Is it possible to improve your returns from your investments by timing the market? Today, I will share with you my experiences. Hello and welcome. My name is Peter B. and I welcome you here at My First Million, where we are achieving our financial goals together. So, I wrote down quite some notes here for this, just in order to make sure that I won't forget any relevant details. So, before I start my story, I want to give you some background information in order to help you to put yourself into my shoes and evaluate my situation that I was in at that time when my story begins. So basically, I grew up, studied and worked in Switzerland. However, my wife is Taiwanese and I have been living and working in Taiwan for several years already. Also, I'm following the US economic and business related news very closely, just out of my own personal interests. So, to sum this up, I'm somewhat in a triangle spot to understand whatever is going on in Asia, especially East Asia, Europe, and the US. I'm maybe not an expert in any of the three areas, but I have a pretty good pictures in all three areas, what's going on. And it's probably unique for me that there are not many people out there who have the same coverage, geographical coverage, like what that I have been having here. So, and in addition to that, also as a background information, at the beginning of the following story, just right before what's going on there, I just have listened to the audiobook, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. If you're not familiar with The Black Swan, black swans are basically what unexpected events that have a very large magnitude and very large consequences are called. They usually later on in history also will be defined as a dominant role for how the history is developing at a specific time and area. So now to the beginning of my story. It is the beginning of the year 2020, or actually it even started a little bit earlier than that, just right at the end of December of 2019. At that time, the news in Taiwan, where I have been living already for several years at that point, started to pick up the story and more stories that there might be a virus outbreak in the city of Wuhan in China. And just for additional understanding of this situation, in general, because of the political history in the region here, Taiwanese in general are quite skeptical and even observant of whatever is going on or whatever is happening in China. So for me, myself, I knew that something is going on in China that might be more severe than that the whole world might be believing. So I also had kind of a skepticism of whatever was going on there. However, as you know, with the authoritarian system and regime, China might be able to get everything under control again at that time, even though they might be using draconian measures to keep everything under control. So, but anyways, I was observing closely what's happening in the news. So I wasn't sure at that time, will it be a global outbreak or is it only, or China can keep it under control? So, but then as a next step, more or less simultaneously, there were outbreaks in several countries, namely in South Korea, northern Italy, and also in Iran. So these three outbreaks lead me then to the conclusion that early on that the global outbreak was inevitable. Just from my own perception, maybe South Korea alone, with its experience and taking this serious, might have would have been able to get things under control. However, I was also able to see what, for instance, the Swiss authorities were doing. And as you know, Switzerland is directly bordering to the northern Italy area. And the Swiss authorities literally did nothing to stop a spreading from Italy into Switzerland. There were no border controls, no restrictions at all, even though at that time the news already picked up that there's an outbreak in Italy. And also there's a considerable amount of people living in Italy but working in Switzerland. So they're commuting every day between the two countries. And at the third area, Iran, I have no idea how Iran would be handling an outbreak. So I wasn't even able to evaluate whether or not they're even capable of getting things under control. So as a result, my evaluation is the virus that was breaking out was a black swan event. Even though now maybe Nassim Taleb would argue differently, just because of the terminology. But for my evaluation, it was a black swan event. So, and also as a result, of course, this led me to the conclusion, especially I have seen that the whole world didn't take this seriously at that point yet. But to me, it led me to the conclusion, it's time to review my whole portfolio, my whole investment portfolio. And so I sold a considerable amount of stocks, just around 1 to 1.5 weeks right after the market peaked, the highest point of the market. And it was right before the market started to drop significantly. So just to highlight, a considerable amount, yes, for me personally, but it was still the vast minority of my holdings. So the majority of my holdings were still invested. So in hindsight, of course, maybe the right decision at that time would have been just sell everything at that point. And what was the result? My market timing was right on the spot. I think thanks to the unique situation that I was in. So I really was able to profit on market timing at that point. However, then how did this story develop? 1.5 months to 2 months later, COVID was really outbreaking nearly everywhere around the globe, nearly in every corner around the globe, and situations got worse and worse. However, the stock markets already went into a V-shaped recovery. So they dropped very sharply, but they're already like a bounce back. For me, a V-shaped recovery was completely unreasonable at that time. I was more expecting of a double dip scenario, like a double W-shaped scenario, where after the first bounce back, the markets will drop again, or even drop much further as COVID has been rolling out and getting worse and worse. So, as I was expecting that, I reviewed my portfolio again, and I made the decision to sell at least some of my positions again. Again, a minority of my portfolio, but still, I made the decision to sell some stocks again. I calculated the probability of what will be rolling out after that as extremely low. But what exactly happened next? So instead of a W shape recession, the V shape just continued to recover. So the markets continued to go up after I sold my second branch or tranche of stocks. And even more, the market completely recovered within 6 months from the COVID outbreak, and then continued to rally up until the end of 2021. So at this point, you can see my second timing was completely off. I completely misjudged the situation. So now to my learnings and conclusions from this whole story. Sometimes you will be able to see something that others don't see, especially don't see yet. And these kind of situations, of course, can give you an opportunity to time the market and to take advantage of the market. However, when it comes to timing the market, you cannot just be right once. You need to be right at least twice. One time when you're selling your stocks, and then one time again when you're buying the stocks. So in my example, I was right when I sold the first time, but I was wrong when I should start buying again. Completely wrong. I even did the opposite. Instead of start buying it, I sold again. So timing the market is extremely difficult to do. And also sometimes you think you're seeing something that others don't see yet. However, it could be that you're actually completely wrong. That what you are seeing is wrong. Your perspective is wrong and the other investors' perspective was right. Or maybe you're right, you're seeing the right things, but you misjudge the consequences out of it. Maybe you assume, okay, now this is going to happen. So as a result, the markets are doing well, or as a result, the markets are doing poorly. But then maybe just the opposite could be happening. So in my own conclusion, even as a close observer, it's nearly impossible to correctly time the market over and over again. You might be right once, but it will be very difficult to be correct twice or third time or fourth time and a fifth time. And once you start to time the market, you will try to do it over and over again. And it works well until you're really wrong at one point. So what will I do instead? What to do instead from my perspective? I think what's probably a better approach is just take a look at the market's evaluation. Sometimes the market is fairly evaluated. Sometimes the markets are over or under evaluated. So in the long run, valuation matters, as we all learn. Use this as an advantage. Overall, if the market is overvalued, if the securities that you have invested in are overvalued, maybe it's time to build up a cash position. And when the market is undervalued, so when the market is dropping and the market starts to get undervalued, you can reduce your cash position by taking the money and start investing it into the markets. What are your experiences of timing the market? And do you time the market, or are you using other investing approaches? Please share in the comments below and we can learn from one another. Thanks a lot for joining me today. I look forward to see you again in the next video, and especially I look forward to see you winning financially.